I'm sure by now everyone, I mean, it's been everywhere, so I'm sure you've heard about it that or read about the equal pay dispute between the U.S. Women's National Soccer Team and the U.S. Soccer Federation. If you've not, I'm going to break it down. Anyway, the long and short of it is that the U.S. women's soccer players accuse the Federation of discriminating against them by paying them less than they pay the men. Apparently because the men get paid more in bonuses per game than the women. And so what has now happened is that the U.S. Soccer has now offered the women the exact same contract as the men so they can earn equal pay as the men's team. And guess what? They are not happy about it. Surprised? Well, that's what I'm here to talk about. So we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive. So to do that, let's rewind a little bit. So if you remember, we've had this conversation back and forth about how the women are paid less than the men and how they want equal pay for the same work. Okay, so for the sake of this conversation, let's agree that the women do the same work as the men in that they play the same game. They play football or soccer, as we'll call it over there. And let's assume they play the same tournament also, which is a World Cup and all the other tournaments and so on. So the issue now is, are they actually getting paid less than the men, or are the men getting paid way more than the women? Anyway, bottom line is the U.S. Women's National Soccer Team sued U.S. Soccer at district court in order to get paid more money, or essentially to get equal pay as the men. And their argument was they wanted to get the same bonuses that the men were getting paid. And as we all know, that conversation snowballed into a global conversation with certain countries actually implementing equal pay between men and women's team. I think it was a Scandinavian country where the men's team actually donated or took a cut in their bonuses so that they could be at par with the women. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Sierra Leone became the first African country to actually have the same bonuses as men and women. And I think Nigeria also recently did the same thing, paying the women about $10,000 for doing the AFCON. I think I can't remember the game that they paid them, but they did pay them about $10,000 and $5,000 for game. But anyway, back to the US women. So their argument, as we've said before, is that they were being paid less for doing the same work as a men's team, and they took that argument to court. Now, the district judge, after reviewing all the evidence, looked at the two key areas: the money they were being paid or the compensation they were getting in comparison with the men, and the contract. So what did the judge find? Now let's start with the money. The judge, and this may come as a surprise to some people, but if you've been following this case, you know it's not. Bottom line is the judge dismissed their case, that they had no case. So, and it was on this basis of two things. One, the money. Now the judge found that the U.S. Women's National Team actually earned more money than the men. Now, as an overview, in total, the women made $24 million in total pay, while the men made $18 million in total pay. Now, calculated on a per game basis, the men made $212,000 from 111 games, while the women made $220,000 from the same games. Now, the argument from the women's side has been that the women had to be way more successful than the men to earn about the same amount of money or slightly more. And that's where this breakdown is going to come from. And all these numbers that I'm putting out here come from the court documents. There's nothing, I mean, both sides presented their case in court. So all of the numbers that you're going to see here now, or you're going to hear, come from the court documents. Now, for the men, here's what the men earn. For normal games, friendlies and all that, they get $17,000 for a win. It's slightly more than that, but I'm just rounding it up. It's actually $17,625, but that doesn't matter really. So they get $17,000 for a win. They get $8,000 for a draw. The actual amount is $8,125. Then they get $5,000 for a loss. For World Cup, now they get a roster bonus for being on the World Cup roster of $68,000. Now that the actual amount is $68,750, but again, I'm running it up to the nearest number. So they get $68,000 each for roster bonus. And then the players split $2.5 million for qualifying for the World Cup. They split $5.6 million for getting to the semifinals, and they split $9 $0.375 million for winning the World Cup, if they win the World Cup. Now, just to be clear, this is all the men get, nothing else. It's pay as you play. If you don't play, you don't get paid. So if a player gets called up to the roster and gets dropped and doesn't make the World Cup squad, you don't get anything. If you don't get called to the World Cup squad, you don't get anything. If you don't get called up to the squad really for a game, you don't get even those ones that they get for other games. So it's when you come, you pay, you get play. Sorry, you come, you play, you get paid, you go home. Now we go to the women. The women's contract is a bit more. Now for friendlies or other games, or these other regular games, they get $8,500 for a win and $1,750 for draws against teams that are ranked from number 1 to number 4. So if they play a team ranked, they are number 1. So we'll make it, I mean, if they drop in the ranking, but anyway, if they play teams ranked between 1 and 4, they get $8,500 for a win and $1,750 for a draw. That's way less than the men, right? But we'll come back to that. Now, if they play teams ranked from 5 to 8, they get $6,500 for a win and $1,250 for a draw. They don't get anything for losing. Now, if they play against teams ranked 9 and below, they get $5,250 for a win and nothing for a draw or a loss. Now, when we get to the World Cup, they get a roster bonus of $37,500 for being on the roster, the World Cup roster. Now, for winning at the World Cup, they get $3,000 for a win, and then for a draw, they get $500, nothing for a loss. Now, qualification for the World Cup, they nets them $37,500 each. If they win the World Cup, they get a total of $110,000 each. They come second, $50,000, third place, $25,000. Now, the post-World Cup tour, you remember the women, the US women always have this post-World Cup tour. Now, for that tour, they get $250,000 to between $250,000 to $350,000 US dollars. And then they get a revenue share of $1.50 for every ticket sold during their games that they play at home that US Soccer sells. So for every ticket that US Soccer sells for the US Women's National Soccer Team games, the team gets $1.50 from each ticket. They also get, for the two tournaments, the She Believes tournament and the Four Nations tournament that they play, for winning the tournament, they get a $5,000 bonus each for winning those tournaments. Now, this is where the similarities end. And when you look at it just on this face value alone, you'd say, hey, come on, the men are actually earning more than the women. But here's where it gets complicated. Now, for the women's national soccer team, the agreement with the US Soccer Federation is that they get a minimum of 20 contracted players on the US Women's National Soccer Team. And just before I'm going to come into the contract issue, because that's the second issue that I'm going to talk about. But the men and women have two separate collective bargaining agreements, which is two separate contracts with US Soccer. So now their contract includes a minimum of 20 contracted players on the team. Now, each of those players earned a salary of $100,000 a year. That's base compensation. Whether they play or they don't play, they get paid $100,000 by US Soccer. In addition, they also get a one-time sign-on fee or bonus of $230,000 per player, just for signing that contract. That's for 20 players. Now, if any of those players now play in the US Women's Soccer League, the NWSL, they also get a base salary between $62,000 and $67,000. So for tier 1 players, they get paid $67,500. And for tier 2 players, they get paid $62,500. The men don't get all of that. The women get that. Now, if we go down to more benefits. Now, in addition to all of that, the women get severance pay from US Soccer when their time is done. They get injury protection. They get health, dental, and vision insurance. They get pregnancy pay. They get guaranteed rest time. They get child care assistance. They get partnership bonuses if they exceed the revenue targets, that are set by US Soccer in terms of for marketing, and increase viewership bonuses. So if they get increased viewership over a certain number, they get bonuses. They also get image rights payment. So now, when they went to court, their argument in court was that they should be paid the same bonuses as the men. Don't forget, we already agreed that the men were getting paid more in bonuses than the women, because if you look at it, the men were getting paid $17,000 for a win, $8,000 for a draw, and $5,000 for a loss. And they were also getting paid $68,000 for a roster bonus, while the women were getting paid $3,000 for, $8,000 for a win, 6.5 for, depending on the quality of the opposition and so on. But let's not forget that all of these other benefits that the women get, the men do not get. So their argument was that they should be paid the same bonuses as the men, and that the court, and I kid you not, that the court should ignore all of the other benefits that they get, which the men do not get, and rule on the basis that they should be paid the same bonuses as the men. Which brings us to the second issue, which is the contract. The court found, anyway, no, before we get to the contract, let's just put this in some perspective. In 2020, because of COVID, US Soccer canceled all their games, both for the men's team and the women's team, due to COVID. Now, what did that mean? What that meant was that the women still got their $100,000 a year salaries for 2020, and they still kept all their benefits, all the injury protection. There was no, they didn't play, so no injuries, but health, dental, vision insurance, pregnancy pay for those who got pregnant, guaranteed rest time, childcare assistance, partner. So they got those fringe benefits. What did the men get? The men got a grand total of zero, nothing. Why? Because they're on a pay-to-play contract. So they did not play, they did not get paid. So, which brings us nicely to segue into the contract. Now, what the judge found, or what the court found, was that the US women, and this is very important, listen to this, it's been said over, but I think it needs to be repeated. So what the court found is that the US women, when they were negotiating their contract, their collective bargaining agreement, they were offered the exact same pay-as-you-play contract as the men. The exact same contract that was offered to the men was offered to the women, but guess what? They rejected it. Because why? They wanted the guaranteed contract that they got with all of these guaranteed payments and all of those benefits. And so what did the judge say? The judge said, and I'm reading this verbatim now, he said, the women's national team rejected the offer to be paid the same pay-to-play structure as the men's national team, and that the women's national team was willing to forego higher bonuses for other benefits, such as greater base compensation and guarantee of a higher number of contracted players, that 20 players getting $100K a year, and $200,000 sign-on bonus. Accordingly, the judge continues, plaintiffs cannot now retroactively deem their CBA worse than the men's national team CBA by reference to what they would have made had they been paid under the men's national team pay-to-play structure when they themselves rejected such a structure. So when they were arguing their contract, they were offered the exact same contract as the men, and they said, no, we're not going to take a pay-as-you-play contract. We're going to take a guaranteed contract where you pay us, a guaranteed base compensation of $100,000, $230K sign-on fee, health insurance, severance packages, dental, all of those fringe benefits, childcare assistance, all of those fringe benefits. And so we'll take a different contract. And then now they won the World Cup, and they're not thinking, okay, look, if we had been on the same package as the men, we would have made more money. And then you want to retroactively change the contract. Judge said, no, that's not going to work. You can't retroactively come back and say a contract you negotiated is not bad because you think you would have made more if you would had the same contract as the men, the same contract you were offered and you rejected. So what's that no more? So after seeing that judgment, the US women's national team said it was unfair and they lodged an appeal. As they were doing so, and this is where it gets really interesting, their collective bargaining agreement expired at the end of this period. Now, that of the men had expired since 2018, and they were negotiating a new contract, but they were still playing under the terms of the old contract. Now, and I think it's important to point out here that during all of this, the men's national team came out in support of equal pay for the women. They wanted the US soccer to pay the women the same as they were paying them, but we'll come to this later down the line when we get to the important point. So part of the US women's national team argument was that they only got to share $2 million for winning the World Cup, while the men would have got to share $9 million if they had won the men's World Cup. On the face of it, it looks like a valid argument. But now let's do another deep dive. Now, US Soccer's argument to this was that it was FIFA who set not the contract for how much they pay the players, because essentially the federation decides how much they pay the players. But their argument was that FIFA pays $30 million, a $30 million prize pool, total prize pool for the Women's World Cup, and a $400 million prize pool for the Men's World Cup. Now that's almost like a huge percent disparity between the Women's World Cup prize pool and the Men's World Cup prize pool. So the prize money for winning the Women's World Cup is $4 million out of that $30 million prize pool. So the US women, they get to share $2 million out of that $4 million. So now they're actually getting 50% of the prize money that comes from winning the World Cup. Now, for the men, the winning prize money is $35 million. That's what France got for winning the World Cup in 2018. So if the contract that the US Soccer negotiated with the men for them to get $9 million would have seen them get 25% of the actual prize money. So in effect, the US women were getting 50% of the prize money for winning the World Cup. But if the men had won the World Cup, they would have only got 25%, so a quarter of the prize money, while the women were getting half. So that brings us back to the CBAs. For those, again, collective bargaining agreement, which is the contract between the teams and the federation. So with both CBAs having expired, US Soccer now say, you know what, let's make this simple. You know, instead of us going back and forth and this and that and then going back, let's just make it simple. You want equal pay with the men want you to have equal pay. So what we're going to do, we're going to give the women the exact same contract as the men. How about that? Doesn't that sound fair? And to make it even easier and to get around the FIFA disparity, US Soccer said, look, what we'll do is this. Whatever each side earns at the World Cup, whatever FIFA pays, we'll put it in one pot and we'll split down the middle and share 50-50 between the two teams, so that there's no disparity between what the men earn. So if the men get to say the semifinal of the World Cup where they get $2.5 million, and the women win the World Cup where they get $2 million, you know, rather than say, okay, men take 50% of 2.5 million, women take your whatever, they just put everything in one pot. So it's 2 million from the women, 2.5 from the men. That gives you $4.5 million. It's split down the middle, and each side gets $2.2 million. Fair enough. But two sides were not happy. Remember what we said, that the men's team came out in support of equal pay for the women? Well, when they heard that, they were not so happy anymore. And there had been no comment from, at least for now, there's been no comment from that side. So now for the women who wanted equal pay with the men, they have been offered the exact same contract with the men, which means that they earn the same bonuses as the men. Now they say they don't want that anymore. Why? Because it means that either they lose all those fringe benefits that they get from their own contract, or the men get the same thing that they get. So the way it is now, I mean, I haven't seen this new contract. I don't know what the terms are, but let's assume that they are getting the exact same contract as the men. That means that all of the fringe benefits that they get, all that 100K salary guaranteed money is gone. The sign-on bonus of 230K, gone. Health benefits, gone. Pregnancy assistance is gone. Childcare assistance is gone. Guaranteed rest time, gone. All of those things gone. They just get a simple pay as you play contract. And now they're not happy. So it turns out that maybe what they actually wanted was not equal pay, but more pay, because in effect, they wanted to keep those benefits they get and also get paid equal with the men who do not get the same benefits that they get. So, and I think I should also rewind again and remind us that let's use the COVID year as an example. During that COVID year, because the women had a guaranteed base compensation from US Soccer, even though they did not play a single game in that period, they still earn their 100K a year salary. And this COVID year just sort of illustrates that for us, because during this COVID year, US Soccer canceled all games. And because of that, the men got a grand total of 0, but the women still got their 100K base compensation. Almost all those additional fringe benefits that were baked into their contracts, they still got them, while the men got 0. So now US Soccer is saying, you know what? We're not going to go into all of this anymore. We're going to make it simple. We're going to offer you guys the same contract. We're going to take the money from FIFA, put it in one pot. Everybody will share equally, and problem solved. But now they're not happy. I was watching Alex Morgan on TV. I think even saying that, oh, it looks as if they go with the men's contract, they're actually going to get paid less than what they were paid before. Excuse me? You wanted the same contract as the men. You wanted equal pay for equal work. And US Soccer is saying, look, we're giving you the same thing. And now they're saying, oh, it's a PR stunt. How? I mean, I can't wrap my head around it. So maybe someone can help me understand, but how is it a PR stunt? You're saying you want equal pay, and they're saying, okay, look, we're going to give you the same contract. You earn the same bonuses. You earn on the same pay as you play basis. And now you're saying you don't want equality anymore. And as the final kicker, just before I go off, US Soccer is led by former US women's national soccer team player, Cindy Paulo, who replaced the former president in the wake of controversy over, yes, you guessed it, the same equal pay issue. Sometimes that's why they say, be careful what you ask for, because you might just get it.